I'm Jason Bischoff-Wurstle for the New Haven Museum, and this is Micro-Histories. This month we're talking about Morris Cove, and that's what brings us out to our historic house here in the Cove, the Party Morris house. And we're not just here because it's our house, even though, that's a good reason to stop by, but because this is one of the oldest structures in all of New Haven and dates back to the late 1600s initially, and this structure itself is the late 1700s. The Party Morris house was the anchor of Morris Cove. This was the main estate which all the surrounding neighborhoods were a part of, initially in the 1600s through the 1800s. And then as the Cove developed into the Newport of Connecticut, a seaside summer resort area, and then into a densely packed suburban feeling residential area in the 20th century. So join me today on Micro-Histories for Morris Cove. Behind the Palisades along the eastern shoreline of New Haven Harbor lies Morris Cove. The neighborhood is built mostly on land that was formerly part of the Morris Plantation and is predominantly constructed after 1920. Previously, it was mostly agrarian along the seaside, and in the late 19th century, Morris Cove was a summer resort destination known as the Newport of Connecticut. Trolley service to Lighthouse Point connected the Cove to downtown New Haven beginning in 1895, and this assisted in the boom of suburban development that formed the current topography of the neighborhood. Originally known as Solitary Cove, in 1671, Thomas Morris completed a purchase from the Quinnipiac tribe for the use of timber production. Tradition has it that Morris first came to the Cove by chance, following a lost cartload of wood that had floated from his wharf across the harbor. While he was there, he was struck with the richness of the heavily wooded area here by the seashore and determined to purchase it for lumber. The area at the time was owned by the Quinnipiac tribe as a result of the reservation established when the New Haven colony was first established in the years following 1638. The Native American reservation was among the first reservations in North America. In 1779, the Cove was invaded by British and Hessian mercenaries. The Cove had been valued by local Tories, and the Morris lands suffered from theft of their own supplies, as Captain Amos Morris was also a captain in the local militia. Upon rebuilding the home to its current structure that it is today, completed in 1781, the Morris family were among the first to apply for wartime reparations, later from the new United States government, due to the invasion in 1779. The historic Party Morris house, as it stands today, was constructed in 1780 by Captain Amos Morris and completed in 1781. The house at that time was situated on 170 acres, which included saltworks, farm outbuildings, and the land at 5 Mile Point, which is known today as Lighthouse Point. You can check out our episode number 1 for more info on Lighthouse Point. The house is an example of Georgian architecture, which was in vogue at the time, and contains the last remnants of the previous Morris house that had been burned by the British on July 4th, 1779. The granite chimney walls and a small part of the L are all that remains from the previous structure, which was believed to have been built only 30 years earlier. The house and the land remained in the Morris family and their descendants until William S. Party's passing in 1918, when the house was passed on to the New Haven Colony Historical Society, which is now us, the New Haven Museum. During this time, the land would grow smaller as the family's fortunes shrank. Beginning in 1834, parts of the house and property were mortgaged and sold off in order to preserve the central farm. This resulted in the eventual building of the surrounding residential neighborhood that we know today. The neighborhood, as I previously mentioned here, was more agrarian. Farms, because what do you need in a growing city? You need fuel. And what's that fuel? Generally hay for your horses and timber for both construction and heat and cooking. So areas like this tended to be, when they were more far-flung, tended to be just that, rural. And that's what makes this a really phenomenal spot, is that this was a very rural spot right by the ocean. And it made it because of its inaccessibility. As time went on, it also went back and forth, meaning it was sometimes part of New Haven and other times part of East Haven. In 1881, Morris Cove made a transition from being a small, isolated, predominantly at that point, fishing village with little ties to the oyster trade, to being part of the larger picture of New Haven, when it was acquired as part of the Annex and Fairhaven Heights from East Haven. So similar to when I had mentioned in previous episodes about Westville, Morris Cove here actually had its own services for some time after it was acquired. Again, similar to Westville. So they were operating their own school system, their own fire services, their own police services for a spell. And that remained until approximately 1921. Again, similar to Westville, when Morris Cove came full in and fully taxed by the city of New Haven. By this point, Morris Cove had been connected and was well on its way to beginning to be this dense residential neighborhood that we're standing in today. The Party Morris house became a boarding house as the Cove became a popular summertime destination in the late 1800s. At this point, the family painted 1671, which was the year Thomas Morris had purchased the land that the house was on from the Quinnipiac tribe, as an advertisement to the house's heritage during the trendy heyday of colonial nostalgia. William S. Party bought the house in 1915. He began to restore the house and removed the porch and the advertisement. The front brick walks were put into place and the driveway ran to the opposite side of the house. He modernized the house enough to serve as a residence for him. However, he would only own the house for 3 years before he passed away in 1918. In 1966, the Party Morris house served as a setting for a children's mystery novel written in the style of the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew books. The mystery of the pirate's ghost took place in Haven City, and specifically Pingree Point. While it was based on the house and the stories of its past residents, the book was fictional. It does describe the children's adventures and enjoyment in spending a summer in a grand old homestead. With the introduction of the trolley to Morris Cove in 1895, the seaside village was connected directly to downtown New Haven and had been recently reintegrated as part of the entire city. This only added to this strip here fully attaining its potential as the new port of Connecticut. At this point, there were still a small amount of year-round residences, but that began to grow. But seasonally, people were here in abundance. The year-round homes that were here in cottages opened their doors, reconfigured, and became often boarding houses. But most prominently stood in this approximate spot, and that was the Shoreham Hotel. And the Shoreham Hotel had inherited the tradition. It actually had started in the 1850s. And when this area, along with the Pavilion Hotel across the harbor on Water Street, catered to vacationing Southerners generally, who wanted to leave the heat of the South and come north in the summertime. The Shoreham Hotel was built in 1905 and anchored the movement of hotels and boarding houses in this area, and began to transition from, again, a sleepy seaside seasonal area to more of a year-round residence. And the reason why, because I keep mentioning why this was the new port of Connecticut, is just that idea. It had the same sort of sense of, being by the ocean and having the certain proximity that was easy to get to. Because when you think about it in the scale of, at that point in time, everybody did everything generally in their neighborhoods. Unless you had a horse, unless you had a carriage, unless you were beginning to afford cars, you stuck around in your general area. So to come here from the densely packed downtown New Haven to either go to Lighthouse Point or stay for a very minimal fee that would be the equivalent of approximately $5 for a night or a weekend out by the ocean was literally a vacation. The hurricane of 1938 eradicated much of the Victorian era cottages and homes and resorts and the remaining colonial stock as well. Morris Cove changed quite a bit, but remained quite quaint and a very tight-knit community throughout the 20th century. Whereas in the beginning of the 20th century, the trolley line had linked this neighborhood to downtown New Haven and beyond. And you had people like J.P. Morgan parking their yachts behind me in the Cove. And the development of the New Haven Yacht Club and the expansion of the hotels and this era of relaxation and resort life. And that came to a close with World War I, later the Great Depression, the hurricane of 1938, and then with World War II came after the introduction of Interstate I-95, or at the time the Connecticut Turnpike, which severed the East Shore directly from downtown New Haven, and at the same time brought a massive influx of new residents, predominantly Italian Americans leaving neighborhoods such as the Hill and Worcester Square, poured into this neighborhood and developed it into much more of the suburban feel that we have today here. Community groups like the Morris Cove Gardening Club and the Groaners established Morris Cove Day and the local parade. Today, Morris Cove is one of the most unique neighborhoods in a city of distinct and unique neighborhoods that we're out here capturing the stories of. So for the New Haven Museum, I'm your host, Jason Bischoff-Wurstle. Please keep it tuned in to Micro-Histories. Hit subscribe down below here on YouTube and follow us. And follow us at www.newhavenmuseum.org, especially in the summertime. Keep an eye out on what we've got going on at the Party Morris House. And you can find us at our main spot at 114 Whitney Avenue in downtown New Haven. So again, from the New Haven Museum, I'm Jason Bischoff-Wurstle. Thanks for tuning in.